I'd like to welcome the patrons of the Lewisboro, Bedford Free, Ruth Keeler Memorial, and Pound Ridge Libraries. I'm Liz Gabriel, representing the Lewisboro Library. Tonight's program is Living with Black Bears, presented by Jonathan Russell, a wildlife biologist with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. He has spent the majority of his 15-year career focusing on the management of big game species and resolving human-wildlife conflicts. Tonight, he will talk about bear biology, behavior, and measures you can take to avoid human-bear conflicts. Welcome, Jonathan.
Sorry, I mute myself. Thank you very much. It's good to be here. With an expanding bear population in the lower part of the Hudson Valley and Westchester, it's good to get some information out there on bears and what people can do if they see one, or steps they can take to avoid any conflicts or situations with bears. So as I said, if we can just hold questions till the end, kind of look forward to hearing from everybody, maybe sharing, I said questions or personal experiences with bears. So I'm just going to jump into this here. So as we just said, today we're going to talk a little bit about bear biology, then the status of bears in New York, and then what I spend the majority of my time on, which is bear-human conflicts or interactions. So in North America, we have grizzly or brown bears, which are essentially the same species, polar bears, and the black bear. So black bears are the only bear we have in New York, and it's actually the only bear species found east of the Mississippi. And black bears are found only on the North American continent, where brown bears and polar bears are also found in Europe and other continents. So continuing with black bear biology. So what is a bear? A typical bear. What do they look like? How big are they? So again, they're typically, this is for an adult, about 2.5 or 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Females, adult female typically weighs about 165 pounds. Males are quite a bit larger. Typical adult male around 300 pounds. Cubs, very small when they're born. They're less than a pound. They actually fit in the palm of your hand, but grow pretty rapidly. Females' home range, and this can vary quite a bit on things like bear density of other bears in the area, food, kind of shelter, all those resources a bear needs. So it's very rough, but a female can typically have a home range of about 10 square miles, where males have quite a bit larger home range, about 100 square miles. And that male's home range will typically overlap with several females. So I mentioned the typical size of an adult bear, but they can get quite a bit larger. The largest black bear in New York was about 750 pounds. So when we look at an animal's skeletal structure, often you can tell us a lot about that animal. A lot of times when people think about a bear's skull, what they kind of focus on are those large canine teeth. And those are certainly impressive. But what's more important to the animal is those flattened molars in the back. That's how they get the majority of their food. They do eat the majority of the plant material. And also note that very large nasal cavity. A bear's sense of smell is very, very well developed and far superior to humans. They've said bears can smell food up to 2 miles away. So females breed every other year, typically in June and July. And obviously, getting close to that time of year now. And that's when bears are usually the most active and most observable, especially during daylight hours, because those males are traveling long distances trying to find receptive females. Females are kind of getting pushed around by males. So that's typically like one of the busier times a year for us because people, like I said, are seeing bears a lot more. Those cubs, even though they breed in June and July, they're actually born in January and February, end of January, beginning of February, while they're hibernating in the den. Litter sizes between 1 and 6 is possible, but in New York, about 2 cubs, maybe 3 is occasionally we've had reports of 4 if the sow is in really good condition. But yeah, that's more typical in our area. And those cubs will stay with the female until they're about 1.5 years. So as I said, they're kind of born in the den. They'll spend all summer with her, and they'll actually den with her that following winter as well. And that next summer is when she comes back in the heat in June. That's when she'll kind of run them off. And that's another reason why we see a lot of bears in that June, July period. Both the adult male is looking for females, and also that's when those younger ones first get kicked out. And typically, they don't have an established home range yet. They might be kind of getting chased around by other bears. And they're not very good at finding food. So those are the ones that you might see a lot of times taking, chances. An adult bear wouldn't, trying to get trash, bird feeders, that kind of stuff. So bears also have a unique 2-stage pregnancy process. During step 1, which is mating, the eggs are fertilized, but they don't implant or begin to further development. Several months later, which is step 2, development begins when the fertilized egg finally implants, and this is called delayed implantation. Implantation is delayed because if the bear is underweight or sick or injured, the fertilized eggs may not implant or develop any further. Instead, the eggs can be reabsorbed, and that's so the bear can have the best chance of survival to breed again in the future. So just a quick note on cubs here. We do get calls occasionally on cubs being orphaned or abandoned, but typically, just like with deer, the female will leave them alone for some pretty extended periods while she can forage for herself. So she's trying to produce milk for them, and that requires a lot of calories. And if she could only travel as fast as those cubs can travel, she couldn't cover much ground. Like I said, couldn't consume as much food as she needs. So if you do ever see a bear, you really want to or a bear cub, I should say, feel free to give us a call at DEC, and I'll put that number up at the end. But typically, we're not going to do anything for at least a 24-hour period to make sure that if that sow is around, she has an opportunity to come back and reunite with that cub. When female bears sense danger, she'll typically send those cubs up a tree or leave them at the base of a tree and then leave the area herself to draw danger away. Which again, people sometimes see that and think she's leaving the cubs, but in fact, it's kind of a normal, natural behavior. And those females return later to gather the cubs when no people or pets are around, again, usually after dark. As the cubs get older and more mobile, it's common for the mother bear to leave her cubs to go forage for food, as we discussed before. And she can travel up to 2 miles away from where she leaves those cubs. So even though I said she's not in the immediate area, that's really not too much of a concern if those cubs are alone for a little while. But if you do ever believe a cub is truly abandoned, again, don't touch it. Instead, just leave the area immediately and contact DEC. One thing you never want to do is feed a cub or bears in general, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. So black bears are not true hibernators. Woodchucks, bats, chipmunks, and other true hibernators, they'll enter a state close to suspended animation where their body temperatures fall close to freezing and their metabolism slows to almost a halt. A bear's metabolism, heart rate, respiration rate drops dramatically, but its body temperature only drops about 12 degrees during that hibernation period. During that period, they don't eat at all or go to the bathroom. Bears' dens really are remarkably clean and odor-free for an animal that's, spending 4 months there. And a bear can lose from 15 to 30% of their body weight during hibernation. And a lot of people think bears den when it gets cold, and that's not really true. They put themselves to sleep for the winter because food is in short supply. There really isn't enough food out there to sustain them. In far northern climates, bears might be in their dens, fasting, living off their fat reserves for up to 6 months. In our area where natural foods are available for a longer period, they might den anytime between November and mid-December, and emerge again in typically mid-March or early April. Down here in the kind of southern part of the state, where it warms up earlier than, say, the Adirondacks, we typically see bears begin to emerge, like I said, in that earlier time around mid-March. And also say bears might den for much shorter periods of time, or not den at all if food sources are available all year. So some people might, that might be a food source that's derived from people, like people feeding birds, or an unsecured dumpster, or residential garbage cans. So it really is good for a lot of reasons, to make sure those food sources aren't available, but especially, like I said, well, first of all, we're going to prevent conflicts between people and bears, but also for the benefit of the bear. We want them to kind of go through that hibernation period. So a lot of times, rather than actually seeing the bear, because bears, especially in areas with people, they might be more active at night. So we might see the bear themselves, but we might see some sign left by the bears. So you might see tracks, and black bear tracks are unique, both because of their size. They're not many other animals around that will leave a track that size, but also their toe pattern. So black bears will walk flat-footed, and that's called plantigrade locomotion, just like people. And while not normally associated with speed, black bears can run as fast as 35 miles per hour for short intervals. So pretty quick. You may also see black bear droppings, which are distinctive in both size and quantity. Compared to other mammals, they have relatively short digestive tracts, and food passes through them fairly quickly. Another thing sometimes you'll see are they're called bear nests. And that's the result of them foraging in trees. You see this with sometimes cherry trees, beech trees, occasionally oaks, where there's like a lot of food up there, and they'll kind of break branches and build these platforms, and they'll kind of stay up there and sleep up there. Typically, you'll see a lot of bears scat on the ground around the tree, but they'll stay up there until that food source is really exhausted. Other forms of bear sign, male bears will make territorial markings on trees and other objects during the breeding season, including structures used by humans. Down the road from my house, there's actually a kind of dead-end dirt road that doesn't get much traffic, and there's some telephone poles along there, and the bears have kind of used that telephone pole as a marking post. And what they'll do is they'll kind of reach up and claw it. So you can actually get a kind of an indication of how big the bear is by how high they can reach. And they'll also rub their back against it, kind of scent mark it. Like I said, when it's roughed up, a lot of times, if you're not sure if it's claw marks or not, a lot of times you'll see like actual hair from the bear kind of stuck in there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what bears eat. As I mentioned before, we're talking about the skull. The bulk of a black bear's diet is made up of vegetation. Bears will consume, or known to consume, approximately 80 species of plants in New York. During the fall, bears' appetites are biologically programmed to increase so they can store as much fat as possible for the winter. This increase in feeding is called hyperphagia. And during the fall, they need to consume as much as 10 times as many calories as they need during the spring and summer. For some bears, that means finding 20,000 calories a day or more. So obviously that's a lot of calories, and a lot of their food is, not calorie dense. So that means they spend a lot of time eating. In addition to that vegetation, bears also really target insects when available. That's a really high preference food source for them. Okay, so moving on to our black bear population size and kind of how it's expanding and why it's expanding. So prior to European settlement, black bears were likely pretty widespread. Populations were abundant throughout New York State. But by the late 1800s, due to extensive forest clearing for agriculture and unregulated killing of bears, populations were driven to pretty low levels and were restricted to those more inaccessible mountainous areas of the state. Namely the kind of Adirondacks, the Catskills, and then in the southwestern corner of the state, the Allegheny Mountains. In the early 1900s, bears were granted legal protection as a game animal, and regulations on hunting allowed for that bear population to slowly start recovering. During that same period, many people resettled from those rural family farms into urban and suburban areas. And these large tracts of abandoned farmland began to revert back to forest. And that's the habitat bears do the best in. So it's kind of between, like I said, regulating of hunting and an actually increase in habitat for bears. We're seeing them in a lot of areas they just weren't traditionally in. So this map, as it says, is from the 1950s. And we can still see those kind of core ranges we talked about in the Adirondacks, Catskills, and Alleghenies. But we can see also like bears, incidental sightings, bears are starting to be seen in surrounding counties. But just kind of, no real breeding population outside those areas. Just kind of a bear that's kind of moving through. So we can compare that to this map, where it shows the population has expanded significantly since then, again, especially over the last few decades. So given the current rate of bear range expansion and habitat availability across New York, it's likely that we're going to continue to see this expansion of home or ranges for bears. At this point, it really shouldn't be surprising for any upstate town or county to see a bear passing through their area. And when I say upstate, I really do mean like essentially north of the Bronx. So a lot of people ask, how many bears do we have in New York? And getting an accurate population estimate of wildlife, especially like an animal like bears that exist in fairly low densities, is very challenging. But we estimate the current population in New York State somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 bears. And in the southeastern portion of the state where we are, somewhere between 1,800 and 2,600 bears. And I'll stress this is a minimum population count, so it's likely quite a bit higher. So as we've seen that bear population increase and expand throughout the state, other things have also increased. Incidents of negative human-bear interactions are one, right? Bears coming in, accessing food in dumpsters or taking down bird feeders, maybe trying to get, backyard chickens. Also, residential, commercial, and agricultural damage. And how much time DEC spends on trying to educate the public and respond to those situations. So some positive benefits have also increased, like the ability for people to see a bear. A lot of people, we actually did surveys on people's attitudes towards bears, and a lot of people really valued that opportunity to just see a bear. they're large megafauna that people really think it's a special opportunity to see one. For recreational hunters, the opportunity to hunt bears is valuable to them. Again, a lot of people do really appreciate the ability to have a viable bear population in New York. Again, we've really identified the fact that we need to be proactive with management and education on how people can successfully coexist with black bears, especially in those areas, like I said, where bears, there was no significant population of bears previously. So moving into how we manage bears. So DEC in about 2000 kind of put together our bear team, which there's a biologist from each region, which I'm a member of that team. And we've been working towards, identifying, say outreach materials, documents that can kind of guide DEC's management decisions. So two documents I'll kind of call out, I guess, or key documents about bears are one document's Black Bears in New York, and that really provides an overview of black bear biology and distribution, the history of them in New York. And both these documents are available publicly on our website. And the other one is our black bear management plan, and that outlines the methods used to monitor and manage black bear populations and provides guidance for the DEC for our activities related to bears. So that's response management, all that stuff. As you can see, that black bear management plan, the old document, the current document, it covers to 2024. So we've been working on putting together a new one. So black bear management is like a lot of wildlife. Is the way we primarily management is through licensed recreational hunting. So you can see that on the left side there, I'm not sure what year that was, but we've expanded, like I said, because bear populations expanded, we've also expanded the opportunity for recreational hunters to harvest black bears significantly in New York. It used to be on the left side there. It was just the Allegheny area, the Catskills, and the Adirondacks, where people could legally hunt bears. And you see on the right there, that's been expanded to essentially open the majority of the state up at this point to black bear harvest. And I'll note, a black bear can be legally harvested in Westchester County. So even Westchester County residents had that opportunity. And this just shows how many, or the density of black bears harvested in New York. And you can see that the highest, the darkest red there, is where the highest numbers are. And kind of that Catskill area, with the highest density being in the southern part of Sullivan County. And I'll note this is from 2021. I haven't updated it for last season yet. But I believe this past season, no bears were harvested in Westchester. But in, I think 2022, they had 2 bears harvested in Westchester. So DEC has been gathering information about bears and their habits over the years. We collect information on things like their natural history, habits, movement. And a key concern of bear managers is really the age structure of the population, because that kind of helps us get information or estimate that total population. So to age bears accurately, any bear we handle, we take a small tooth, a premolar, which is removed and then a thin section of the tooth is stained and examined under a microscope. And it's kind of very similar to counting the rings on a tree, because they have that period where they're, the summer period and spring and fall, where they're growing rapidly, and then that denning period, you can actually see that growth, and then that growth kind of stagnate over the winter period, then they grow again. So those we call them annuli, those rings, and they can be observed in the cementum. That's like the enamel of the tooth. So cementum helps secure the tooth in the jawbone socket, and that grows continuously throughout the life of the animal. The oldest bear that was aged by this method was a female from the Catskills that was determined to be 41 years old. So these can be long-lived animals. We also partner with universities and graduate students. This picture was taken as part of a study done with Cornell University, a mark and recapture study using hair samples, where there was a bait kind of inside some widely gapped barbed wire that the bears could kind of move through. But when they did move through that barbed wire, a little bit of hair get caught on it, and they could look at the DNA of that and kind of estimate our local bear population. And here's another picture from that study showing a bear kind of going under that fence. So the future of bear management in New York, we really kind of use an adaptive impact management technique where we're not really focusing on a specific number for population. We're really looking at impacts to people, the social issues revolving around bear populations, and trying to kind of set our goals based on that. Again, it seeks a balance between bear-related impacts, like I said, the negative things, or the negative things, and some of the positive things that bears also provide. And typically, when we kind of do set those regulations, we do have an open comment period, and we want input from the public. So I mentioned this is kind of what I spend the majority of my time. One aspect, like I said, is education, but also how to prevent those bear-human interactions or conflicts. So generally, bears are pretty wary of people. They don't want to be around us. They kind of will avoid going in populated areas. And it really is unnatural for a bear to be comfortable around people. But bears can be attracted to houses and dwellings because of food, and that food is usually bird feeders, pet food, grills, occasionally compost, but the biggest one is poorly stored garbage. And people should be aware that even unintentional feeding of bears creates problems, and it's also illegal in New York. Unkempt properties and irresponsible landowners can unintentionally cause bears to be habituated to human food sources. These bears may begin going from residence to residence, expecting to find the same food availability, and this can cause a dangerous situation to an unknowing landowner who might, come out late at night and say startle a bear that's on their deck looking for, those food sources. Again, unsecured garbage or dumpsters, garbage cans or dumpsters can and will attract bears and a host of other wildlife out there that we really, don't want to have become comfortable around people and houses. So those problems may persist and escalate as bears can continue to find access to food resources that are available near houses. So once a bear builds that association between people, houses, food, occasionally you have bears that may try to enter a home. Typically it's a window that's not secured all the way, or maybe a vehicle where the window is left cracked, but a significant amount of damage there. So again, unintentional feeding can create problems. It's both illegal and just not a good idea for people or bears. A lot of people think, or some people think, that there's a novelty to feeding a bear or that they're helping it, but the reality is it's a detriment to that animal and your neighbors. Bears that are intentionally fed by people will very rapidly associate a food source with people. These bears may begin approaching people in a non-aggressive manner with the expectation that they'll be given food. And these bears' behavior often cannot be curbed. And this can often lead to that bear having to be euthanized, which is certainly not something we want to do. It's very unfortunate when a bear does get to that point, and especially when it can be so easily avoided. So agricultural damage and apiary damage require different kind of solutions to address. And those often involve adversive conditioning of bears. But the best thing is really electric fence. You see that top right corner. If you're a beekeeper in New York or have backyard chickens, you really do need to have electric fence at this point. Some people, will say, it does cost a lot, but for a couple $100, you can have a permanent solution that can protect, like I said, your chickens or beehives from a whole suite of animals, besides bears that would like to kind of get in there, foxes, coyotes, bobcats, all those would kill a chicken if given the opportunity. So again, for a couple $100, a permanent solution that's effective. And if anybody does have chickens or beehives or anything, feel free to reach out to us, and we can provide plans on how to set up electric fence that's effective. So in respond to these kind of conflict situations, we always refer to our DEC Bear Response Manual. This is another document that is available online if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. And it uses a classification system of 1 through 4. And that's kind of the purpose of that, is to have more consistent responses across the state on how we deal with these situations. And in it, there's dozens of possible bear conflicts that have happened in the past, and what's the most appropriate course of action to resolve them. So I mentioned there's a classification system 1 through 4. Let's kind of define those quick. Class 1, those are the most serious ones. Those are bears showing dangerous behavior towards human, pets, or livestock. A Class 2 bear is a bear that's showing undesirable behavior in the presence of humans. And typically that's a bear that's, been around people for a while, kind of lacking that fear, that good, healthy, natural fear of people. And usually has received food from or around houses or from people in the past. So a Class 3 bear is a bear that's altered its natural foraging behavior in favor of those man-made food sources, typically garbage and bird feeders. And that's, probably at least 80% of the calls we get. And the good thing is that's usually there's a pretty easy solution, and that's really just storing your garbage in a garage or a shed. If you don't have that as an option, there are some bear-resistant garbage cans available, or even some do-it-yourself options that we can provide. And a Class 4 bear is a bear exhibiting normal, natural behavior. This might be a bear that was seen by somebody when they were just kind of driving their car and they saw it in the woods, but just, a bear doing bear things. Just to provide a little more detail on this, again, those Class 4 bears exhibiting normal and natural behavior, crossing roads, foraging for food, using those kind of natural wildlife corridors. And the way we respond to this is really just, because some people might be concerned that they just saw a bear. It's really education and technical advice. For those class 3 bears, again, usually bird feeders, barbecue grills, garbage. We're really going to tell people to remove those attractants, including perhaps a site visit if necessary, if we can kind of help you resolve the issue, if you're not aware of an attractant. But typically there's something around it that bear's trying to get access to. And adversive conditioning may also be an option, but typically, and that's kind of essentially scaring the bear from that area. So we might provide some advice to the people to get an air horn. That's a really effective, easy method. Creates a very loud, startling noise. But if that food source remains, that adversive conditioning really isn't going to be effective. The best case scenario, we remove that food source and the bear might come around a couple more times. But if we can kind of scare it off, they learn pretty quick. There's no reason to go around there. So those class 2 bears that clearly show undesirable behavior in the presence of people. These bears in this class may be considered for capture and adversive conditioning. Like I said, those are bears just kind of are too comfortable around people. And we're just trying to reinforce that good, healthy, natural fear of people and houses. And the way we adversively condition bears, again, if kind of we do it ourselves, it might be trapping, tagging, and we might hit that bear with like rubber buckshot when we release it. And that doesn't injure the animal, it just stings it. But we really want to, like I said, best thing for people and that bear is to learn that houses and people should be avoided. Again, occasionally you have a class 1 bear. Those are bears that exhibit or have shown behavior that are a threat to public safety. So that's a bear that maybe broke into a house, physical contact with people. And those bears, unfortunately, often do need to be euthanized. Once a bear breaks into a home and does get food, there's a chance that a fairly decent chance that it could do it again. So the best way to deal with a bears or avoid those conflicts, again, like pretty much everything a bear does is really focused around food. So we want to remove that food source and secure it. Store it in a garage or a shed, not a Rubbermaid, those little chintzy Rubbermaid sheds. You really want a wooden shed. You want to take out your garbage the morning of pickup if there's a bear in your area. Don't feed birds from about, like I said, mid-March through December. The birds don't need it in the summer. There's plenty of food out for them. I know some people really appreciate the opportunity to see birds, but the reality is when there's a bear around, it just becomes a bear feeder. And should never intentionally feed bears. Like I said, that's along with it being illegal, it's really a detriment to that animal. Even if the person thinks they're kind of doing something nice. So when we get calls about there being a bear in the area, or a bear sighting, or a bear, say, getting in somebody's bird feeders or trash, a lot of times what people really want is us to come and take it away. And that's typically not effective for us. We had a lot of early efforts when, like I said, bears kind of were first showing up in the area or expanding their range. And there were some efforts to relocate bears, but the reality is those bears typically just come back or begin exhibiting the same behavior in a new area. So you're just moving the problem to somebody else. So what the best thing we can do is really, like I said, let that bear kind of maintain the same home range, but secure those food sources so that they're just eating those natural foods that they should be. Another thing we respond to occasionally are bears in urban areas. And these are typically yearling males. Like I said, kind of June, July is when they're kicked out by the South. they're on their own for the first time. They don't have an established home range. They're usually about 100 to 150 pounds, and they're just covering large distances, trying to find an area, where there aren't bears, a bear already that's going to run them off. They're not good at foraging yet. So they're kind of taking some chances that they shouldn't be. So occasionally those bears kind of will get into a city or other, like I said, urban area. And the biggest challenge with this is typically crowd control. A lot of people are very curious and might kind of gather around. And what we really want to do is keep people back, leave that bear alone. And, if there is a piece of green space relatively close, just allow that bear to come down its own and maybe kind of chase it in that general direction. But we've had a lot of good results with just like I said, keeping people away and letting that bear come down on its own. And that's pretty much, I'll mention, that's like the only situation where we will relocate a bear. And that's typically pretty short distances just to get it out of that immediate area. Another thing people are a lot of times want us to do is just kind of, like I said, dart them and take them away. Even in urban situations, like I said, it's kind of a last resort, immobilizing a bear. There's a lot of challenges associated with that. It's not an easy situation. We need, a couple trained staff members available to respond. And it might be hours before we're able to get down to the area where it is, depending on the location. There are also a lot of safety issues. You're firing a dart loaded with drug into the air. If you happen to miss that bear, who knows where that dart could end up. Bears, after being darted, can run also prior to the immobilizing agents taking effect. So you can also, it sounds weird, but even in a city, you can lose track of a bear pretty quickly. So it's certainly not something we take lightly or an easy thing to do. People also, like I said, again, want to see us just kind of trap them and take them away, especially in urban areas or suburban areas. But even the simple act of setting a trap isn't the easiest. Traps are large. Those doors are very heavy on them and they're dangerous. You don't really want to set them anywhere where children or pets might encounter them because they can be seriously injured or killed. And if the trap remains, it's pretty likely at this point, like I said, with the number of bears we have, that another bear is just going to start doing the same thing. A lot of people say, like, I'll just take it up to the Catskills or something. But the reality is, even in the Catskills, there are very few areas that don't, a bear can't walk a couple miles and encounter a home and keep doing the same thing. And again, those bears adult bears have an amazing sense of direction and often just return to their home range. Bears can, like I said previously, they had tried some relocation efforts. Bears are known to travel hundreds of miles to get back to their home range. So if you do see a bear, the best thing to do is really to give that bear plenty of space and room. They typically want to get away from people. So like I said, where people can get hurt is if they have that bear in a confined area and they're between the bear and the perceived escape route, right? So a bear kind of like knocking somebody over and they're trying to run away. So you really just want to kind of stay away. If that bear is kind of an area where it doesn't belong, like your backyard or something, the best thing to do is just use noise to frighten it off. And again, an air horn is really effective and a great option. What you shouldn't do is growl at it or try to sound like an animal. You want to sound like a person. Just, like I said, blow the air horn, clap your hands, yell, hey bear, get out of here, until it moves off. If you are ever approached, and again, this is incredibly rare, especially in New York, but if you're approached by an aggressive bear, You really want to make yourself as big as possible and speak loudly. If you're with anybody, you should all stay together. Never run. Don't throw food at the bear, your backpack, or anything like that, because that's just teaching it to approach people. And again, incredibly rare, especially in the East, especially in New York. But if you are ever attacked, you want to fight back. Brown bears are the ones they say you want to play dead. But with black bears, you do want to kind of fight that animal off. So I'm really kind of, I know I'm talking about this a lot here, but like I said, this is like the kind of core message that we really want to get out is if you do remove that food attractant, you are removing the reason for the bear to be there. And that can be difficult to do, especially in urban or suburban areas, especially, suburban areas, especially because we are seeing bears that are taking up residence in those areas. And it's hard to get everybody on the same page. But like I said, they're there because there's food available. And if we remove that food source, the bear learns pretty quick that there's no reason to be there. And there's some challenges associated with trying to get people to take those steps. People a lot of times don't want to change what they do. Everybody says everybody needs to clean up their garbage or clean their bird feeders, but like I said, again, a lot of people say, well, I like seeing the birds, or, I don't want to get up early and put the garbage out for the garbage truck, or I don't want to keep my garbage in the garage because it smells. But the reality is that's better than having a bear around. Also, we got a lot of, oh, my neighbor did this, or, this person is feeding it, or a whole litany of reasons. But the reality is, you can only control, it's good to educate them, but just because like the neighbor has their garbage out too, or stores it out, in a garbage can outside, doesn't mean you should do it as well. Again, there's a lot of reasons people come up with on why they can't take those measures, but typically, and if you can't come up with a good idea, feel free to call us. But typically there are solutions that will work, and we can certainly talk through those with you. So for those looking for additional information, DEC, like I said, we talked about some of those documents that we had before. And you can go on our DEC website or just Google NYS DEC bears, and there's a web page on there about like I said, general life history, biology, that stuff. But we also have a whole web page on kind of conflict avoidance. But the best resource I think is bearwise.org, and that's an organization kind of founded by state wildlife agencies that the whole website's just about avoiding bear conflict, and some information on natural history, biology, that kind of stuff. But they have a really great monthly newsletter that they send out. They don't send you a ton of emails or anything, but just once a month, some kind of reminders about how to avoid conflict, but also like what bears are doing that time of year. And I always recommend that as probably the best resource for information on bears. Again, bearwise.org. Okay, so that's my contact information. I will say that I'm out of the office a lot during this summer period when bears are active. So if anybody does want to reach out and just get some information, we have a general wildlife line number, and I'll say it's 845-256-3098. And that's not specific to bears. Any questions the public has regarding wildlife, they can call between 8:30 and 4:30 Monday through Friday, and somebody will be monitoring that phone line that can speak to you. Okay, with that, I think we'll move on to if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'll start with the questions in the chat, and then I'll let people, I'll unmute everyone if they want to ask questions. The first question is even before you started, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, someone listening maybe. Someone asked, is it true that a bear was shot on Old Church Lane recently?
Not that I'm aware of, certainly not by DEC staff.
Okay. See if anyone else chimes in the chat. Another question is, do you know roughly the male to female bear ratio?
So when they're born, right, it's approximately 50-50. But males do have a higher incidence of or mortality, right? Males are more aggressive, they're fighting with each other, they're more territorial, they're traveling, looking for females again, so like a higher likelihood of being hit by a car. So as they get older, that population does skew more towards the female side, but we don't know to what extent.
Okay. Another question, if the weather stays mild in the winter, will the hibernation period be shorter?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about that briefly during the presentation. Bears don't necessarily den up because it's cold. The reason why they den up is because that food source for them kind of runs out. There's no berries, there's no acorns, beech nuts, all those things. Kind of bears are really large animals that require a lot of calories, and when those calories kind of become more scarce, it's more effective for them to just den up and sleep all winter. So it shouldn't. But if the growing season is longer, it might be a little bit shorter, right? So I will say, like, during the winter, if you get a really mild day, sometimes bears will actually come out of the den. They typically won't travel very far and they won't eat anything. But they'll kind of come out, lay in the sun a little bit if you get one of those 50-degree days in January. But typically they do den back up afterwards. So yeah, it won't substantially change their denning, but it could be a little bit shorter.
Okay. Someone asked, can black bears sense that you're unable to run or fight back?
I wouldn't think so. Like I said, if you see a bear and it's just, I always say, like, so if you're out hiking and you see a bear that doesn't see you and it's kind of heading in a direction that's, not near you also, just enjoy that moment and watch that bear. And that's a nice opportunity to take a picture. That's great. If you do see a bear that's kind of doesn't see you and it's kind of walking in your general direction, typically all you have to do is kind of clap your hands, hey bear, wave your hands and let it see you. Like I said, bears don't want to approach people typically, and just letting it know, oh, there's a person there, and allowing it to kind of go off in another direction. I guess I don't think a bear can tell, like, whether you can run fast or anything like that. But again, if I don't know, somebody who's has impaired mobility or something like that, an air horn is a great tool. Again, it makes a very loud, startling noise, and all you do is kind of push that button. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and those are available. You can order them online, certainly, but typically they're available at like a Dick's Sporting Goods, any place that sells like boating supplies or sporting goods. But those are, children can use them, older individuals can use them as well. But an air horn is a really great tool if you live where there's bears.
And even if you were, like, say, going hiking in a heavily wooded area, is it a good idea to bring an air horn?
Yeah. So again, like, bears don't want to approach people or anything. And I think in a lot of situations, just kind of like yelling and waving your hands is pretty effective. But I would say, if you want to bring one, that's a great idea as well. I always tell people, if you're concerned about encountering a bear, if you say you've been carrying bear spray, if you want to, I think an air horn is more effective than bear spray, but whatever makes you feel comfortable and kind of get out there, you should do. So I think it's a great option for a lot of people.
Okay. And then someone else had pointed out, and this is one of the reasons that, we had first contacted you, is that we had heard that there was a rabid bear cub that had to be euthanized in the Lake Truesdale area of South Salem. But are you
Yeah.
aware of that?
Yeah, so I'll talk briefly about that situation. So that was a sow that was actually collared in Connecticut by their wildlife agency. It just happened to den on the New York side of the border. They kind of contacted us to see. So typically they'll kind of, like I said, go in and change the collar and weigh the cubs and see how many there are to kind of get some reproductive information. During that den visit, one of the cubs was acting kind of lethargic. You tell something is wrong with it. It was sent to a wildlife rehabilitator where it died. And then it went to Cornell for a necropsy, and they identified that it did have rabies. So it wasn't euthanized, but unfortunately, yeah, rabies can affect any mammal. So if you ever see a wildlife or an animal that's acting oddly or sick or injured, feel free to contact DEC or your local law enforcement agency.
Someone followed up with that asking how unusual is it, or how usual is it for a bear to have rabies?
Yeah, so it's certainly not common, but there have been documented cases of it. So any mammal can get rabies. Certainly, like there's some mammals that have just because of how kind of their life history, or the lower likelihood that they'll be exposed to it, right? But yeah, I can't give you like how prevalent it is, but again, rabies is kind of one of those things that's it's on the landscape. People should be aware of it. So yeah, again, if you ever see a wildlife that's acting sick or oddly, feel free to contact your environmental conservation officers or your local law enforcement.
Okay. I did enable people to ask questions if they're more comfortable asking Jonathan a question rather than typing it into chat.
Mm-hmm.
So does anyone have any questions, additional questions?
So yeah, in our question about the rabies, the situation, and it says, sorry, just looking for this chat here. Yeah, it's just it was so they can actually see which rabies variant it was, and it was a raccoon variant. So they think that the cub may have been bitten by a raccoon. And then how is rabies transmitted? So again, I'm not a pathologist, but typically it's from a bite or a scratch. It's from saliva getting into the bloodstream, that kind of stuff.
And then someone asked, will the air horns work also for wildcats on her property?
Yeah, if you mean bobcats, yeah, certainly. Same thing with coyotes, anything like that. Like again, typically if animals are spending a significant portion of time on your property, I'd first take a look at any potential food sources and make sure those are all buttoned up and removed. Because even with hazing, those animals will continue to return if they are getting that food reward. But yeah, it's always a good idea if you have a undesirable animal on your property. Air horn's a great method to scare them off. Be effective against, say a bobcat, coyote, foxes, anything like that.
When you had mentioned before, when you were talking about having like the 6-foot electric fence around, like beekeepers use them, and you also said people with chickens. So will bears go after chickens?
Yeah. So actually, the chicken food can be almost more of an attractant than the chickens. Typically, once they're in there, and if they do have access to the chickens, they'll certainly eat them as well. So again, if you've got chickens, rabbits, beehives, anything like that, it's always a good idea to put in a properly installed and maintained electric fence. For bears, what you really want is a minimum of 5,000 volts. So just make sure that it's going to be putting that out, and then kind of use a tester on it to make sure that's what it's kind of conducting. Because some of the solar chargers especially aren't powerful enough to kind of meet that 5,000 volt minimum.
Okay. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions in the chat. And I want to thank you so much, Jonathan. This was very educational, very informative. And I'm sure everyone agrees.
Yeah, no, and thank you for providing the opportunity to speak to everybody. Yeah, Westchester and Lewisboro specifically, it's one of those places 10 years ago, really didn't have bears, or if it did, it was kind of a transient one, pretty rare occurrence. At this point, we have, documented or had reports of sows with cubs, and it's probably gonna be one of those things that, keep progressing that way, and we're going to be seeing more of them. So it's always a good idea to kind of get the word out on what to do, be a little proactive. And it's always great if people can kind of share the information with their neighbors if they do have a bear in the area, on what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And I guess I'll throw out one more plug for that bearwise.org website. Great resource to direct people to if they have any questions. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Thank you, you too.